Rob Maaddi from the Associated Press, who covers the Eagles and the Phillies and does it all. He is with me now on the stream and the Boardwalk Honda hotline, as you can see him on the live stream. And if you're listening on the radio, Rob and I will get into some interesting conversation on the Eagles. You know, it seems that, Rob, there's a new Eagles story that kind of gets thrown out there every 2 weeks or so. It's like, let's take another blast at the Eagles. But I want to get your opinion on this. You of all the guys, like, you're a very level-headed person, I feel, right?
I appreciate that, Mike. I try to be.
Would you describe yourself in that matter?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think I try to keep things on an even keel. You know, it's kind of like the athlete mentality. Never get too high, never get too low.
Well, so we hear about the dysfunction in the Eagles front office, and I don't doubt that there is some level of dysfunction. But my question for you, Rob, isn't that something that goes on in all teams in today's game? In other words, where we sit in sports, not just football, you have analytics against the football guy or the baseball guy, and one side of the building doesn't respect the other side's viewpoint, and you have this constant butting of heads. Does that not happen with the Phillies and their analytic department against the Scouts, the Eagles, and other teams, or is this just solely an Eagles problem?
No, I definitely don't think it's solely an Eagles problem, Mike, and you bring up a great point. I think it depends on the construction and the makeup of the front office and the coaching staff and the executives. So if you have, let's look at the Phillies, for example. If you had the current analytical department in there with old school guys like Larry Bowa as a manager, certainly they would butt heads. Gabe Kapler embraced it. Joe Girardi is a guy who knows how to balance both. When you look at it from the Eagles' perspective, based on that story by The Athletic, by Zach and Sheil and Bo, and they did a great job breaking it down and evaluating, it looks like there are certain issues, and I can understand that. I don't think, like you said, that is exclusive only a Philadelphia Eagles problem, but the Eagles do have a level of dysfunction, and that stems from there's a lot of distrust. And you and I have spoken a lot about what happened with Carson Wentz in that situation. And there are other players there, past and present, who will tell you that there's a level of distrust that they have with the organization, with the front office. And that's something that certainly isn't unique in sports, but is problematic.
There's no question. And look, the Eagles have been down this road before, Rob. They had total dysfunction. It was a mess, when Chip Kelly was here. 2 years later, they won a Super Bowl. So is it stuff that you just have to kind of endure and kind of figure out your way out of it? Or is this something that is perpetually happening because of who's in charge?
Well, that's a great question. And yeah, they had success. They were able to turn it around. Howie was the leader, the executive vice president of football operations, who put together a staff that won a Super Bowl, right? Who put together a roster that won a Super Bowl. However, as we look at that, is that the outlier now, that Super Bowl season? Is this really an organization that is a middle-of-the-road, average team that's going to potentially contend for the playoffs, but not necessarily be a Super Bowl contender? You look at the opportunities that Howie has had with now on his fourth head coach. That's something that most general managers don't get an opportunity to do. The draft issues that they've had, the draft problems are well documented, Mike. We've talked about that a lot. This is a time now where they got to start hitting and start executing on the draft picks. So that's part of the problem. So at some point, you do have to start holding the people in charge accountable. You can't just say, well, we won a Super Bowl, let's run it back. Or, well, we won a Super Bowl with these people in charge, let's see them do it again because they've done it. Yes, I understand giving him the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, there has to be a fine line drawn. And when is accountability going to be something that Jeff Lurie holds Howie Roseman to beyond just the head coach or the quarterback or assistant coaches?
Rob, you have covered the Eagles for how long?
22 years now.
22 years, the entire Jeffrey Lurie era. Did you ever feel that Jeffrey Lurie was an issue?
Not as much as I'm starting to now. I always thought of Jeffrey Lurie, Mike, as a guy who wanted to win, was passionate about winning, who didn't have a problem with spending money, somebody who would go out there at all costs and try and bring in the talent. I lived through, as a fan, the Norman Brayman era, and I saw free agents walk out the door. I saw Reggie White leave. I saw other guys leave. So Jeffrey Lurie's the complete opposite. We know he wants to win. We know he wants to bring in talent. But what we have seen and the stories that are being reported and the information that I'm also receiving is that he's increasingly become more involved in the day-to-day operations of this football team. And that is never a good situation to be in as from an owner standpoint, because you got to hire football people and let them make those decisions. If Jeffrey Lurie is putting together a draft board and telling his guys to draft J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, that's a problem. That's an issue, and that's beyond. And I know he's the owner. I know he signs the checks. I know he can do whatever he wants to do, but that's a problem for a football team.
Right, and I guess this is where the whole Roseman can't draft and he does a terrible job and he's got to go gets a little murky, because how much of that is Lurie overstepping his own general manager? And I want to get your question. You said 21 years. I have never heard the name Alex Halaby before. Is he akin to what Alex Rucker was doing with the Sixers and just having so much power and really not having a title that anybody knew anything about, but having more input than he should? I see that smirk on your face, by the way. You can't hide on this video.
I forgot you could see my reactions. I got to be careful here. I can't roll the eyes or anything like that, right? So it seems, based on the reporting of Bo and Zach in The Athletic, that he has kind of this power struggle has developed. And Alex Halaby and the analytics department, those are things that we certainly got to keep an eye on and we got to dig into. And I'm with you as far as how much does an analytical guy have power in an organization? Because I don't think information's a bad thing. Like, there are people, right, who'll sit back and tell you analytics is terrible, it's ruined the game, it's this and that. I think you need as much information as you can get. If it gives you any kind of edge, yeah, Alex put together that report and all that stuff, but I don't want you solely drafting based on analytics. I don't want you to solely draft based on what a piece of paper or a computer tells me. I want guys to go in there with a football mind, a football background, to be able to look at these players, have a heart-to-heart with them, and know their guts, their character, their determination, what kind of person they are. So I think a piece of paper can only tell you so much. I don't want to rip it up and throw it in the garbage, but at the same time, I'm not evaluating or making my decisions solely based on analytics.
Yeah, and it seems that Jeffrey Lurie has almost felt like his word has more meaning or power because he has these analytics to back it up. Right?
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be problematic. If you're going to your head coach who has won you that story, what I thought was one of the most interesting little tidbits, that Green Bay Packers game, that Thursday night football game 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It was in September. It was sort of season-saving victory. They go to Green Bay, Lambeau Field, on 3 days rest.
Yep.
And they beat Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and they do it by running the football. And Carson was efficient, no turnovers, but they ran the football down the Packers' throat, and that allowed them to win that game. To me, that's to be lauded. That's Doug Peterson deviating from the script. That's Doug Peterson finding a way to win a game, doing the Bill Belichick, whatever it takes to win this game. I'm not going to throw because that's what people want me to do, or that's what I've always done. I used the run to win this football game. And based on that report, when Jeffrey Lurie sits down with Doug Peterson and he questions, why didn't you throw the ball more? That to me is outrageous.
Preposterous. I mean, and then to even compound that is, okay, they're doing this every Tuesday. Hey, let's talk about this game. I mean, look, one of the things I like about my position in my job is I'm in charge and no one really asks, maybe, but the thing that really ticks you off is no one asked me a question for 3 months. It's that fourth week after the 3 months. It's like, no one talked to me for 3 months, and now you want to ask me all these questions. I couldn't imagine getting it every single week like that.
And, Mike, I talk to a lot of people as I cover the league, and I talk to a lot of people across the league and various front office executives and various coaches. And I wanted to know how unique of a situation, because going into the conversation, you think this is different, right? And to a man, I still haven't found another team or another coach that says, yeah, I sit down with my GM and my owner every Tuesday after a football game and go play by play and break it all down. I have not seen that. And again, you're talking about a guy in Doug Peterson who, after winning a Super Bowl, could have put his foot down and said, hey, I got the pedigree now. I'm the only guy in franchise history to hoist the Vince Lombardi. And now you're going to bring me in on Tuesday and question play by play.
Right.
What was I thinking? What was I doing? That crosses the line. To me, that's very unique to the NFL.
Yeah, you mentioned you talked to people around the league. You just recently talked to Jacoby Brissett, who was the quarterback in Indianapolis with Nick Sirianni. I'm interested to get some of your takeaways from what Brissett had to say about playing for Sirianni. What stood out about a player talking about the new Eagles coach?
What Jacoby said about Nick was he's prepared for everything. There's no situation that they can encounter that Nick Sirianni hasn't planned in his head or planned ahead of time. And the other part of it that I thought was great was he thinks that he's a great teacher, and he's somebody who can take information and break it down in a way that players are going to understand what he's trying to teach them. And that's going to be very important for a young football team and a young quarterback in Jalen Hurts.
All right, Rob Maaddi, Associated Press, covers the Eagles. Check out his full interview with Jacoby Brissett at Rob Maaddi. You can check out the highlights. I want to obviously, and we just lost him completely there. So we will. All right, well, good conversation with Rob on the organization and the draft and everything like that. And obviously, the stuff at the beginning. I said this before. Like, I'm not trying to say discount. There's Rob. All right, so he just jumped back in the stream there. I wanted to get your thoughts then real quickly on this draft. I asked this question earlier. They moved from 6 to 12. There are people who don't like the trade, essentially because they don't like Roseman, I guess. I mean, he makes the trade, so therefore you can't endorse it. But if you did not like the trade and they landed this guy at 12, who would make you change your mind?
I love the trade, Mike, because I think this team isn't good enough to where one player at 6 is going to make an impact or a difference for them. And I think most people who didn't like it wanted a playmaker at 6, but this is a team that whenever they draft in the top half of the draft since 1988 when they took Keith Jackson, everybody else, the 13 players since then, have been quarterbacks, defensive linemen, or offensive linemen. So I feel this team is going to probably go with an O-lineman or a defensive lineman, and I'm not necessarily convinced they're going to stay at 12, Mike. I think they could potentially trade even further down and add more picks. So I love accumulating draft picks. I like the aspect of building more pieces together, but the only problem is we still got the same front office making the draft picks, and they got to hit on them. They got to evaluate them properly. I would have no issue if they end up with Rashawn Slater. I do like going with somebody like Patrick Surtain if he gets by Dallas at 10. And I think I reported a couple of weeks ago that Dallas really is high on Kyle Pitts. They love him. They might trade up to get him. If Surtain was there, I'd be happy. If Rashawn Slater was there, I think that'd be a great move too for the Eagles. I don't know that I like any defensive lineman at 12, but if they were going to trade down and be in a later teens, add more draft assets and get a D lineman, that would work for me too.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you this question. Who, in your mind, gets credit or drafted Lane Johnson?
Oh, man, right? Because that was Chip's first draft. But you got to also give it to Howie Roseman because he, at the time, was the GM. So if we're going to kill Howie for all the bad picks, we got to give him credit for Lane Johnson. In 2015,
Zach Ertz was also in that draft.
Yeah, and that's a tremendous draft. That was a tremendous draft for Howie, and to me, I'm giving him credit for it. During his tenure with Chip Kelly, we know 15 he stepped aside because Lurie made him step aside, and that one we'll give to Chip Kelly, and he's the one that ended up drafting Nelson Aguilar. But you got to give Howie credit for Lane Johnson and Zach Ertz. As much as we want to bash him for everything else, give him credit for those two.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because you said we don't trust this front office, and I'm trying to go back and say, okay, somebody had to be in charge of or gets credit for some of the good players on this team. I mean, Dallas Goedert's a nice player. Miles Sanders is a nice player. Lane Johnson's a good player. Zach Ertz is a good player. I mean, some of these guys, Fletcher Cox, who drafted him?
That's Andy. But Jordan Mailata, they steal in the 7th round, right? They take a gamble on him, and if he develops into a future starter, that's one that Howie can hang his hat on. Jalen Mills, getting him in the 7th round, starting cornerback for a Super Bowl champion. Give him credit for that.
Right. Sayamala is a starter, 3rd round, right?
Yeah.
So I get everybody's hate and their anger, but there aren't universal misses from this front office. I agree that the last couple of years, it seems like it's when it's really been a problem, and that is, it feels like, Rob, when we're starting to hear that Lurie has gotten more involved.
Yeah, and that could be a factor. And this is something that I've been wanting to take a deep dive into, Mike, and just the scheduling and everything else is very difficult. But I really want to take a deep dive into those draft picks most recently. I don't really think we can evaluate 2020 yet. 2020 to me is still up in the air. Jalen Reagor could develop into being somebody who's a viable number 1 wide receiver. He's not there yet, but he could certainly develop into that. So it's something that we got to look into, I feel, and see what who was responsible. And you know what we do here in Philly, man, is we're going to look at all the guys, and I'm guilty of this all the time. They passed on DK Metcalf. They passed on Justin Jefferson. Well, look at those teams who drafted those guys, and then look at the other misses they've had in other areas, and maybe they're for other 1st-round pick or a 3rd-round pick or historically. It's something that we really, we're gonna focus only on the Eagles because we're in Philly, but other teams have colossal misses too.
By the way, DK Metcalf got passed by everybody not once but twice, so he had major medical red flags. I mean, I get it; it's frustrating, but it's not like this guy was sitting there at 10 and you had 9 and didn't take him. You didn't take him in the 2nd round when everybody else passed on him too.
Mike, somehow you have turned me into a Howie Roseman apologist on the show today. That is good work out of you.
Hey, I just try to play, but I just want everybody to see that I feel like he's not the best. He's not the worst. He's somewhere probably in the middle. That's all.
He's a Super Bowl champion general manager. There are certainly things that he does very well at his job. And one of those things is self-preservation, being able to develop the relationship that he has with Jeffrey Lurie to enable him to be able to still be the GM despite some very lean years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you got to give him credit for some of the things he's accomplished, but also look at it objectively and say there are areas to which I think Howie Roseman can improve.
No doubt.
Everybody can improve in every aspect of a football team.
No doubt. Look, if they won the Super Bowl every year, different story. They don't. They've come on up. But I say this, they have back-to-back losing seasons one time in the Lurie era. That's it. It's not a lot of franchises that can say that. They went 7-9 and 7-9, and everything else has been either a winning season or one losing season. So next year will be a winning season again.
Now you're pushing it.
I thought I could get you on board with that.
Nah. I'm going to stop there. You got me to make excuses for Howie. You got me to say Jeffrey Lurie is one of the top owners in sports. I'm going to draw the line at the Eagles to be a winning team next year.
All right, Rob Maaddi, the Associated Press, of course. Check out his interview with Jacoby Brissett. He talks a lot about Nick Sirianni. The draft is coming up. We'll talk to Rob, and he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Rob, take care, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it, Mike.